This episode of The Unstarving Musician is powered by Podcast Startup, the learning platform for creators with a voice. Podcast Startup covers tech, production, editing, marketing, and more. I know what it feels like to be slowed down by challenges revolving around fear, procrastination, and tech, yet I've recorded and published over 260 podcast episodes. To learn more about Podcast Startup, go to unstarvingmusician.com/podcast startup, and to get free podcasting startup tips right to your inbox. Again, visit unstarvingmusician.com/podcast startup to learn more and to get your free podcasting startup tips. This is the Unstarving Musician podcast. I'm your host, Robanzo. The podcast features conversations with me, indie music artists, and industry professionals, and it's all intended to help other indie music artists be better at marketing, business, the creative process, and all the other things that empower us to do more of what we love. Make music. Welcome to another episode, musos, multi-instrumentalists, songwriters, artistic souls that you are. I hope you are doing well. I hope you got a little sunshine in your life today, whether it's from the weather or someone you love. I got back from more travels. I have a Mexican visa now, so we are officially, we being the wife, the pets, are officially on our way to Mexico. Not right now, but soon. And we're pretty excited about that. Yes, I'm still recovering from that travel, a little jet lagged, even though I wasn't in a different time zone. Short travel, long distances can just be that way. My guest in this episode is Jared Judge, multi-instrumentalist, podcast host, author, tech nerd, entrepreneur, and gigging musician. The day we recorded, it was raining hard here in Panama, and the power went out, or was blinking on and off, I should say. It hadn't gone out. But fortunately, Mother Nature spared us, and we got through the interview, which was a relief because I knew this was going to be a good conversation. On his Gigging Musician podcast, which you should check out, Jared dissects everything that goes into being a successful gigging musician. The Unstarving Musician curates things you can use to be not an unsuccessful, unstarving, a successful musician. And everything I do here is made possible through the generosity of listeners like you. If you love what I do here on the podcast, please visit unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor and or the show notes for this episode to learn about the options for offering your support. It really has an impact on keeping the lights on at the Unstarving Musician. I hope you'll consider it again. That's unstarvingmusician.com/crowd sponsor. Jared and I share a lot of sentiment about gigging. He has a great story. He went to, man, I told you I'm jet lagged. He went to a proper music school. He got a master's and then was told by his professors when it was time to go find work to go get auditions. He talks about that, and he was ready to get to work as a musician and conductor, but auditions proved to not be the best path to getting to work quickly. So guess what Jared ended up doing? He took some business classes, and it was game-changing for him. Now I think Jared makes a six-figure income as a musician because he treats it like a business. But I know he's putting together a nice little empire, and I think he's already on his way to doing very, very well. Some of what we cover includes private event opportunities and how he got started in that market, marketing yourself as a musician, selling yourself as a musician, treating your music like a business. We also talk about his book, which is called Gigging Secrets, the Underground Playbook to Making a Living Performing. I love that title. And his music business app, BookLive Pro. And links for all of this stuff will be in the show notes. And you can catch me on an upcoming episode of his Gigging Musician podcast. I don't believe it has published yet, or I would have it here for you. And if it has, I apologize, but I'll get it to you one way or another. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I have a feeling Jared and I will be keeping in touch with one another. You can find him at Jared Judge on Facebook and Instagram. Learn about all the things he's doing. Here is me and Jared Judge. Hey, Jared, thanks for joining me for a conversation today. How are you?
I'm great, Rabanzo. It's great to see you again.
Thanks. And I just remembered this, but I have to mention this for my listeners. I know some of them are podcasters, and if nothing else, they're all marketers if they're musicians. But you sent me the best email to ask if I'd be interested in having you on the podcast. Where did you learn that? Where did you borrow anything you borrowed for that? It was amazing.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad you liked it. I will be honest that it's not original. There is a podcaster, John Lee Dumas, who
Yeah.
runs the Entrepreneur on Fire podcast. And
Mm-hmm.
I was at a marketing workshop, surprise, and he was one of the speakers. And he said, "Here is the perfect podcast pitch email. Steal it." So I took my phone out and took pictures, tried to zoom into the text, customized it for my podcast, and as a result, we're now here.
It's amazing, and I know John Lee. I actually have a picture with him at a conference in London, and I saw him. I saw him. I didn't see him. No, I did see him speak. I saw his partner speak. She did a big headline thing at Podcast Movement in Nashville earlier this year. But he's a great guy. It's so funny because I probably have that same template and I just never used it. I suppose the other thing I should ask, this is another podcast question, but when I look to find out if somebody might be interested in having me on their podcast, I've kind of started looking outside of this whole gigging world that you and I are so intimately familiar with. How did you find me? Or was it easy? I hope it was easy.
It was pretty easy, yeah.
Okay.
So I pretty much every day I search on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, just variations of the keywords like music, musician. I try to focus more on musician-based podcasts, simply because music ones tend to have recordings of music all the way through. They're not interview format.
Mm-hmm.
And you popped up pretty high up in the rankings, so that's how I found you.
Okay, cool. Well, when I listened to an episode of your podcast, I was like, wow, I've never seen this before. Of course, it's a little bit newer than mine, right? How many episodes have you done?
Just 70, but they're all
Oh,
short form.
and that's a good number. Congratulations. So it's called the Gigging Musician Podcast, and I thought it was really great. I need to listen to some more episodes because I literally listened to the first one. I'm like, oh, this is great. We definitely think alike, but you were talking about things. You shared a lot of new stuff with me. I really loved it. So
Oh, I'm glad to
kudos
hear
for
it.
that.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. So let's talk about something I think a lot of musicians would be interested in knowing. What do you see as the private event performance opportunities these days?
Yeah, so for me, private events are huge. Not because they're the perfect gig for me, although I do kind of think they're the perfect gig for me, but because they are a high volume gig that's also high value, which means it's a perfect way for me to fund my music career and give me the freedom to do other types of creative work too. So where I see, I don't get into politics at all, but COVID caused a lot of our gigs to go away. A lot of our opportunities had to go virtual. But the first gig type, like the first in-person gig type to come back, were the private events, meaning the weddings, the parties, the funerals, the corporate events, simply because there were fewer restrictions on those types of gatherings.
I'm
So,
smiling at the irony, but go ahead.
yeah, because the word funerals.
Well,
um,
not just that. It's the intimacy of the events and the attitudes with COVID, which I completely understand, by the way. And I'm with you on the whole, like, we won't go into politics or anything. But anyway, continue. I digress.
Yeah. Well, so I discovered these private events while I was in grad school because I went to music school. I'm a traditional classical musician, which many people see as highbrow and stuff, but I am not highbrow at all. um, but I did have these dreams of being a professional symphony conductor. Like I've always wanted to do that ever since I was like a little kid, and my grandfather took me to see Joshua Bell or some violinist on stage. I was like, I want to do that. And
It's
so I
amazing.
went to music school twice. Once for my undergrad in music education, second time for orchestra conducting to get my master's degree. And the crazy part was in neither of those degrees did they actually teach me how to get the job that I so desperately desired.
Right.
They taught me here's how to analyze a piece of music with 1, 4, 5 chords, and here's the history of how the symphony orchestra was created, but nothing about here's the business side of music. So I did what they told me to do, which was take auditions. And this was right before I graduated my master's program. I was like, I need to win an audition. Otherwise, when I graduate, I have to get a job in retail or food service. That's not what I want to do.
Right.
So I did it. I did the thing, traveled across the country, took auditions. And at that point, I had actually gotten into military music. I wanted to be a conductor of either the Army or Air Force band.
Mm-hmm.
And so I took an audition with the Air Force band. And as a conductor, the audition actually they have you stand in front of this 100-piece military band and conduct them. And these are some of the best musicians in the US military. And it's very intimidating.
Right.
But I did it. And after the audition, the commander of the band pulled me into his office and asked me to shut the door. And I was like getting nervous and shaking a little bit. So I thought either it was really good news or it was really bad news. Hoping for the good news. He said to me, Jared, that was a great audition. I can see you're talented, but we cannot offer you the job at this time. Come back in a year and try again. I was like, oh no, I'm graduating in 2 months. I can't wait a year.
Yeah, exactly.
So I fly back home, tell my professors what happened, and they say, well, that's too bad. Take on some more private students for the next year and try again. I was like, I don't really want to do that. That's not why I got into music. So I asked them, like, do you have any other way that I can make some money playing music in the meantime so that I can fund my life, pay my rent, feed myself before I try again? They kind of they shrugged their shoulders and said, if you want career advice, go ask the business school. Which was frustrating because I thought I could rely on them for career advice, not just music advice. But I actually did take their advice, and I walked over to the business building on campus and said, hey, I'm this nerdy orchestra guy. I want to make some money with music, but I'm not winning any auditions. Can you help me? And so that's when I started to actually take some private business lessons. Mm-hmm. Like I wasn't a business major or anything, but they told me the most important piece of advice that I needed to hear, which was you've got to treat your music career like a business. Even when it comes into fitting in auditions, how does that fit into your business strategy? And that's how you're going to make a living doing this. So I thought, well, what does that mean? And they said, you said you need money right now to pay your bills, right? And you don't want to teach. What are some opportunities that pay you enough money that you can afford rent, which, Milwaukee is not the most expensive city in the world, but it costs a pretty penny to live and eat. So I said, well, what are some of those opportunities? They said, let's take a look. And they found this website. It was called The Wedding Report. And it had a breakdown in every single city across the US of how much people pay on different parts of their wedding, because music is a part of that, both for the ceremony, the cocktail hour, and the reception. And they said in Milwaukee, the average wedding, they're paying $600 for ceremony music, and your violin would be a perfect fit for that. And
this must have been a class project if I figured this out for you too.
It kind of was. There was like there was a club called the Student Startup Challenge. Yeah. So they $600 per wedding, and they said, well, let's see how many weddings on average are happening in your city every year. And it was like almost 2,000, which blew my mind because that has a lot of opportunities compared to like I'm taking one audition every 3 months.
Oh man.
So they said that's where you need to start, and just we'll help you figure out how to book those, but that will provide you the funding you need to pursue what you want to pursue. So that's how I discovered private events. Sorry for the long-winded story there.
No. So, and have you seen it's a great story. Have you seen things about the events, the private event space What have you learned about it, I guess, that would be great for other musicians to know? So clearly people are still getting married. Are there other things
Mhm.
that you've learned that you try to share with musicians?
Yeah, definitely. So it's kind of all the things that they taught me in the business school is that when people are consuming music or anything for that matter, they're consuming it to solve a problem. So, like for weddings, as an example, the problem that the bride and groom are trying to solve is that they want to remember their wedding forever. And let's face it, like most weddings that don't have some sort of cool entertainment, they're somewhat forgettable just because they all kind of follow the same format. And people are really worried about that. So, your live music solves that problem. If you're in the bar scene, a bar manager is trying to solve the problem of they want to bring more people into their bar so that they can make more money on food and beverage sales.
Right.
So your music solves a problem, which means if you can talk about those problems before somebody even books you, that's how you can convince them to listen to you, listen to your music, and ultimately take the action you want, which might be booking you or buying a piece of your merch or something like that.
Yeah, so great. It's kind of business 101. You look at whatever private events or whatever type of event or venue that you're considering or that you want to get into, and you need to understand what is the problem they want to solve, what are they trying to accomplish that you can help them with, and then address that with them and kind of make that one of your big sales points for why you're a good fit.
Yeah, exactly. Which is interesting because they don't talk about the stuff in when you take private violin lessons or guitar lessons. Really, like music is great because it like nourishes the soul of the musician and it's fun to play and everything, but we don't think about how does it impact other people. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know, I think it's really important to start thinking about that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, on the Unstarving Musician, we talk, a lot of us talk about the impact that music does have on people, whether it's our own or just music in general. It's something that connects us all. And it's also Johnny Bergen, who's been on the podcast. He's a fine blues player. He says, it's kind of a place where people can just let all their worries go when you're playing
Hmm.
live music, and they can listen to that, and it really is.
That's
So,
so true.
so do you feel strongly these days? And I think the answer is yes, or maybe it's more about like, why do you feel strongly these days that musicians can build a career in public and private events?
Yeah, I mean, I just think live music is so important. It's my favorite art form. I couldn't live without it. But I mean, so that's like the big why is like music is, in my opinion, one of the, if not the best art form out there. So I feel we need to do everything we can to support it and sustain it. And going against that is things like COVID that have reduced the opportunities for musicians in the classical world. Even before COVID, symphony orchestras have been in trouble. you
Hmm.
know Audiences have been aging to the point where like the symphony orchestra no longer appeals to the younger generation, which means when the older generation stops going to concerts, what's left? And
Right.
then on the like rock and pop world, concerts are great, but two things are going working against them. One is streaming, which I love streaming, but you're paying $10 a month to have access to a gigantic catalog of music. Artists are only getting a fraction of a penny per stream. So it's not even a viable way for musicians to make money unless they make it big on one of the Spotify playlists of the month kind of thing.
And by
And
big,
then,
we're talking huge anyway, not just,
right.
we're talking huge.
Yeah. And then just the general trend of the fact that most public venues tend not to value live music the way that they should. Like I hear stories all the time of like musicians who go to a bar and then they get stiffed by the bar manager, or even just them getting offered an insultingly low rate from the bar manager in the first place and accepting it because they think they have to. The
Yeah.
problem with that is like that drives down the market rate of live music for everybody, and it makes it harder for all of us to make a living doing what we love.
Right. And I guess it's fair to say that in a lot of the private events that you have more attentive audiences. And, it's funny realization I've come to after all the years of playing in bars and clubs and restaurant bars and wine bars, playing cover music. Uh, Most of these gigs is not to an attentive audience. In fact, the music is sort of a background thing, and they're kind of there for the music, but they're also largely there to socialize and meet people, which is great.
Mhm.
But I would think, and I certainly know, like in the theater venues and the house concert venues, that people are there to watch music, and that's a completely different feeling, right?
Definitely. Like, it's for me, that is like when I'm playing on stage with a symphony orchestra and they the standing ovation at the end and you're accepting all the applause. It feels really good for sure.
Yeah,
Um, but with
must
private events, you don't get that kind of like direct feedback. You don't get the standing ovation, but that doesn't mean that it's not there in people's minds. Um, like for example, for me, when I play weddings, like I'll notice that people in the audience are crying, and they might be crying because of how beautiful the bride looks, but our music elicits these emotions in them that, like, if the tears weren't coming, it might have caused the tears to come to the surface.
yeah, right. I can see that. I can totally see that. And I would imagine that, I mean, my own experience with smaller events, private events, acoustic events, that there are different methods of appreciation that you'll experience, whether it's somebody coming up and just paying you a compliment, or like, can I get your card? My
Yeah,
daughter's getting married, next year, or whatever, how do we find you, at another, do you do any public events? So those things, in a way, are their own little standing ovation, right?
yeah, exactly.
So, what's your best advice for musicians in terms of marketing themselves these days? It's such a changing world.
It really is, but the fundamentals of marketing are still the same, because the fundamentals of marketing are based on human psychology, which our brains haven't really evolved for thousands of years. We still crave, like, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. First, we need food and shelter, then we need all these other things. And so our brain kind of works the same. But for as far as like what musicians can do to learn marketing, obviously, like, consume courses and content, kind of like the Unstarving Musician's Guide. I have my own book that helps musicians learn the basics of marketing for private events. It's Gigging Secrets. That's at
Wh-
giggingSecrets.com.
Which looks amazing, by the way. And let's get the full title in. It's Gigging Secrets: The Underground Playbook to Making a Living Performing, which I love.
Yeah, thank you, for sure. And it kind of boils down to two things. One is the marketing, which is understanding the problems of the person who's booking you and being able to speak to them and show how you solve those problems. And then the second thing is selling a gig, which selling is basically persuading them to take the action that you want them to take, which is booking you. And you don't use any sleazy tactics to do that. You do that by uncovering more about their problems and then building up the value of what you have in their mind and giving them a way to pull the trigger afterwards.
Right.
So
I
that's
love that.
mhm.
Something I'm reminded of from listening to an episode of your podcast, the then most recent one. I'm not sure if it's still the most recent, but you have developed a number of kind of upsell opportunities or methodologies that you take to some of these. Like, I imagine that this works beautifully at wedding events, but you had everything. And man, I really encourage people to go check out your podcast, and I will put a link to the specific episode I was listening to. But you have there's the gig itself and the fee for that. And then there was the one that comes to mind is a lot of people want to everybody wants a keepsake from their wedding. So you offer basically a pro recording of the music that was performed for them to buy. And it sounded like we haven't talked about this, but it sounded like you kind of do some after the event production to make maybe package that both from a soundscape and also a physical perspective that you give to them. Are you are you always looking for new things like that so that you can, so that when people get these gigs at private events, they can basically, in many cases, increase the take home without having to worry about things like a tip?
Yeah, I'm always looking for new ways to do that. The way I see it is like when somebody books you, they have solved problem number one, which is I need entertainment to remember my wedding. But that might also create new problems. So, what can I create that will help solve problem number two and problem number three? And each of those things, those are upsells. For example, like in addition to that keepsake album, a lot of people getting married, they might want amplification for their officiant so that the whole crowd can hear the officiant delivering the wedding and their vows and everything. So that would be something else I can offer as an upsell is, hey, we can provide wireless mics, a lapel mic for your officiant and a handheld for the couple and any readers.
Amazing.
But I would say that that's kind of more an advanced technique.
Right.
Most musicians really could work a lot on just getting the gig in the first place.
What's the low hanging? I mean, what's like the first upsell? Any like I've actually got a surprise request from a longtime friend in the San Francisco Bay Area when I was still living there. I was in this cover band that was playing basically classic rock, and that I grew up on that stuff. It's not something I like. I just love to go out or necessarily look for a gig doing, but it was very enjoyable with these guys, and it was always challenging. The songs were challenging, but anyway, my friend was getting married, and he said, "We want these guys, this band called Still Kicking, to play at our wedding." I'm like, "Really? Okay, great, we're in." Just to kind of set a potential scenario here, from everything from a classic rock band to a quartet, a string quartet or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you might typically play in. What's some of the low hanging fruit or the first upsell that an experienced private event gigging band could go for if they haven't ever done anything like that before? Does anything
Yeah.
come to mind?
The first thing that comes to mind is DJ on set breaks. So,
Yeah.
if you play a 45-minute set and then you take a 15-minute break instead of silence, hey, we have a professional DJ on staff. That's an extra couple $100. We'll play that during your breaks. Some people package that into the base booking fee, but if you're not doing that, that could be a nice thing to experiment as an upsell. MCing for the event, again, that could be packaged as part of the gig itself, but like say it's an awards ceremony and your band is like playing house music for the awards ceremony. Hey, we also have this very talented MC, like our lead singer will also present the awards, something like that.
Yeah, that's amazing. These are great ideas. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. I seriously can't wait to hear some more episodes of your podcast, and I need to get a copy of the book too. I love it. Tell me real quick in the remaining time we have about BookLive Pro. This is something we've not really talked about in our email exchanges or anything.
Yeah, for sure. I'll try to be as quick as possible, but there's a story.
You're good. Take your
So,
time.
all right. So I mentioned that these upsells that I do for my weddings, they solve problem number two. Like first, I get problem number one solved. For most musicians, problem number one is getting the gig in the first place, right? So that's why you and I both work at coming at it from different angles, but how to get gigs to help musicians make a living doing what they love. Once they do that, and I know you've talked about CRM software before on your podcast,
Mm-hmm.
but once they start to get busy with all these gigs, there's a lot of administrative work that they have now created for themselves. Running a band is a full-time job. And so when I did this for myself after I booked enough gigs, I was so busy. I had just gotten married to my wife Emily, and we wanted to go out on a date to an apple orchard an hour outside of our city. Checked our calendar. I was using Google Calendar, which I know you recommended on one of your episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Checked Google Calendar. There was nothing on this Saturday. It was a fall Saturday, I think October. And then I checked my spreadsheets too, checked all the other ways that I would keep track of things. And we had no gigs. So I was like, let's drive an hour away, pick some apples. So we're picking Honeycrisp apples. I get a phone call, which was fine. But then I look at the caller ID and it was a wedding planner that I had worked with a couple times already. So at that point, I was putting two and two together. Like, it's a Saturday. Saturdays are wedding days. This wedding planner is calling me. It's like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's wedding time. Oh, crap. So I answer it. She is screaming on the other end of the line. Jared, they walk down the aisle in 10 minutes. Where the heck are the strings? Of course, she didn't say heck. She said something a little stronger. And I froze up. I didn't know what to do. I told her, like, I'll call you right back. And I start scrambling because I didn't want to screw up this person's wedding. Called every string player in town. Can you get to this wedding in 10 minutes or less? Nobody could. And at that point, I was like ready to give up. And I called the DJ with defeat in my voice. Anthony, I screwed up this wedding so bad. Could you please pull a speaker from the reception out to the ceremony and cover their ceremony? Thankfully, he said yes, but it still was the worst day of my life. I felt so bad for like ruining their wedding. I apologized, refunded them their money, actually paid for Anthony to DJ their entire wedding because I felt so bad. And then Emily and I would go to a bar afterwards just because like I needed to drink my sorrows away a little bit. As we're about to head home, instead of driving, we do the responsible thing and call an Uber. And I'm looking at Uber and I'm seeing the app kind of in a new light for the first time. And I was noticing that Uber is essentially managing a gig for these drivers. Mm-hmm. It's telling them the venue, like pick them up here, it's telling them the date, the time, of course, and the itinerary, like the set list, like here's where you're dropping these guys off. And then it direct deposits them after the ride or after their gig. It's like, oh, if only there was something like this that would have managed me as I'm managing my string quartet, I wouldn't have missed that gig. And so, but the cool thing is like, I've always been a tech nerd. So I pulled a couple all-nighters and dusted off the old programming book and created the very first version of BookLive for myself. I didn't let anyone else use it. I put in the very next wedding, which was like the following week. And I said, hey, I need these two violinists, Paul on violin 1, me on violin 2, a viola player and a cello player. And I need you to confirm them and secure them for me. So I pressed one button. It texted them. It emailed them with date, time, venue, pay. Gave them a button. Are you confirmed? Yes or no? 30 seconds after I pressed that button, my phone vibrated saying, Paul is confirmed. Catherine is not available on viola, but I've already swapped her out for a sub. Denise is now going to play viola. And from that moment, I was like, I'm free. I felt like Dobby the house elf after he was given a sock. Because all of a sudden I had to do less administrative work. I would never miss a gig again. And I added more parts to like my music business process into this app, like contracts and communicating with the bride and groom for my weddings, collecting their set list. I added more pieces to that, and more I just like freed my time up more and more to play and hang out with my family, that kind of thing. So that is now BookLive. It is being used by over 2,000 musicians across the US and even in Canada. I don't know if it'll work in Panama. I'd be happy to have you as a beta tester.
Sure, I can try it.
And yeah, it helps keep track of musicians' income. Like we now give out these awards that are like right behind me. They're gold records. We call them the Major Sixth Awards for groups that book 6 figures or more in gigs through this software.
Oh,
and
wow.
we've already had 5 winners, which I'm very happy about, but I want more.
Yeah, that's really cool. Well, I love it. I kind of previewed it. I'm just kind of looking through the website, and I was like, "Oh, this is really cool." And I was wondering to myself, are there other apps that are doing this? And it's funny to hear you mention, my mention of when I put the book together. A spreadsheet or CRM software, and what was the other thing you mentioned? Google Calendar, right?
Yep.
And it does get kind of hairy. And I said as much in my book that, with subbing comes a lot of logistics, and you really need to be careful. So this sounds like a great tool. And I'm sorry, I don't have the URL right in front of me. Can you say it, please, for people who want to check that out? I'll be sure to put it in the show notes for this episode.
Yeah, you could just go to booklive.com. Pretty simple.
Cool. That is great. God bless you for creating that. And then giggingsecrets.com to learn about the book and some other stuff that you're doing. So are those the best places for people to find out about your work and to contact you? Or do you have somewhere else you'd like them to know about?
Yep, those are the best places. And I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. You can find me at Jared Judge, and you can follow the BookLive app page. It's at BookLive app on Instagram.
Cool. I love it, Jared. Really a pleasure talking with you. Thanks for making first contact, and I look forward to more conversations. Thanks for coming on, man.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Rabanzo, for having me.
Absolutely. This episode was powered by Bandzoogle, the platform for musicians and bands to build their website and manage direct-to-fan marketing and sales. Bandzoogle features powerful design options, a commission-free store to sell music, merch, and tickets, detailed fan data, integrations with social networks, and more. Plans start at just $8.29 a month, which includes a free custom domain name. Try it at bandzoogle.com and use the promo code ROBONZO, ROBONZO, to get 15% off your first year. That's bandzoogle.com, promo code ROBONZO. Did you know you can help other independent musicians find the Unstarving Musician by following or subscribing on your audio platform of choice? Well, now you do, and it really does help. And if you have feedback, please go to unstarvingmusician.com to get all my contact info. You can text me, call me, email me, leave a voice message right there on that page. Just go down to the bottom of the page and you'll find everything you need to know. I really would love to hear any of your comments, suggestions, questions, whatever you've got. And you can find links to just about everything talked about in this episode at unstarvingmusician.com/podcast. All right, I'm peacing out. Thank you for listening and sharing with your musician friends and fellow indie music bands. Peace, gratitude, and a whole lot of love.